Sharyl Attkisson is an Emmy award-winning reporter, formerly with CBS News. She focused on stories like the Benghazi scandal and the Fast and Furious scandal, which criticized the Obama administration. Attkisson resigned after 2 decades at CBS after a pattern emerged of her best stories being blocked from broadcast. Now she's out with a new book called Stonewalled. Makes explosive allegations, including that the U.S. government hacked her computer to interfere with her reporting. Sharyl Attkisson joins us now from Washington. Ms. Attkisson, welcome to the program. What is the state of American political journalism in 2014?
I think it's somewhat precarious. I think it's in a state of flux. There's an atmosphere in which original and investigative reporting is not as welcome by some of the gatekeepers and bosses as it once was. At least that's an observation, not just by me, but some of my colleagues. And there's an incredible environment of organized pushback and propaganda that seeks to stop, discredit, bully, and quiet those who question authority, whether it's reporters covering stories the powers that be don't like, or the whistleblowers who expose wrongdoing inside the federal government.
A generation ago, being the investigative journalist who could bring down a White House was the highest role model. I mean, I'm sure the Watergate investigations inspired countless young people to become journalists, but I have a question for you about the culture today. Is there a culture of conformity? That is, if one journalist breaks from the pack and asks a new or troubling line of questions, how does the rest of the press pack respond? Are they cheering for that person, or are they saying, hey, come back and do what the rest of us do in the consensus?
I think there's a mix, and I think sometimes they take their cues from the managers and bosses. I do know that ground-level journalists, reporters, and producers sometimes want to follow the trail of some of these controversial stories in the natural direction in which they lead. But if they know those stories aren't going to be published or aren't going to get on television, or if they're being directed to put their efforts in a different direction, that's pretty much what they have to do. I was given largely free rein over most of the 20 years that I was at CBS to follow a story wherever it went, with bosses who at the time weren't worried about whether it appeared as though I was going after sometimes Republicans or whether I was going after Democrats. They just wanted the truth. And many of my stories, in fact, weren't on political figures and political topics at all. But I sensed a change the last couple of years at CBS. There was a change in management on the major broadcasts. There was also a change in the administration and these incredible propaganda pushback campaigns that use bloggers and social media and all kinds of tactics and strategies to stop controversial reporting, or actually to controversialize reporting that they don't like. So all of that combined together, I think, has made for a difficult environment.
Now, I have a question for you. Why do some media outlets seem to favor Obama? I have 3 theories I'd like to run by you. One is ideologically, they're left of center. Another is personal. They want to be in his circle. They want to go golfing with him, maybe. They want to go to his parties with Jay-Z. The third theory is that maybe it's out of a racial political correctness. Do not criticize the first black president. That's unseemly. Are any of these theories valid, or a mix of them? What did you detect at CBS?
I would say sometimes each of those may be at play. Sometimes it can be something entirely other than that as well. In general, I've sensed a greater hesitancy than I've ever noticed to go after powers that be in general, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, corporations, politicians, special interests. There are some managers that seem to me, at least, not to want the headache because of that organized pushback campaign, perhaps because of corporate relationships. Who knows all the reasons why, but I can tell you that the bosses I had the last couple of years were much less willing to go after powers that be, whether they're political, corporate, or something entirely different than the bosses used to be.
Now, can I talk to you a little bit about the Benghazi story? We've talked about it a fair bit on this channel here, and I know the Fox News Network, Fox News channel in the States has too. But in the mainstream media, Benghazi has been code word for kooky or tinfoil hat or right-wing Tea Party conspiracy theory. They've really tried to denormalize it as some sort of kook story. Can you tell our viewers why the Benghazi story and the consequential cover-up are not kooky, why they're important, and what happened to you on this file?
Well, I'd have to say that if anyone has looked at all at the story and they don't understand without it being explained to them why it's not a kooky story. It's hardly worth explaining. I'm not here to convince people to care about something they don't care about. It's just such an obviously important story to me. But I would like to comment on the idea that, yes, there is an orchestrated propaganda effort to portray the story by those who don't want us to cover it as kooky and right-wing. But if you just look at the evidence, the information that I used when I was covering Benghazi came from Obama administration insiders, Obama administration documents. It did not come from Republicans. It was not made up out of thin air. So to buy into that idea that if you cover something that appears to target the administration or that exposes wrongdoing on the part of the administration, that you must be kooky or worse yet, a conservative, is buying into the propaganda line, into this created strategy that's being used to create this environment or an appearance to get the public not to look at that story. And with some people, that strategy is effective and successful. I think most people probably see through it, but I talk about this a lot in the book. These organized campaigns to try to controversialize a story, a reporter, a whistleblower, a politician. Those who question authority are bullied and shouted down by these efforts by those who don't want to be questioned.
We're talking with Cheryl Atkinson in Washington, D.C. Her book, Stonewalled. More with Cheryl after the break.
I think it's interesting. The president just said something which is that on the day after the attack, he went in the Rose Garden and said that this was an act of terror. You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. It was not a spontaneous demonstration. Is that what you're saying?
Please proceed, Governor.
I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
He did call it an act of terror. It did as well take 2 weeks or so for the whole idea of there being a riot out there about this tape to come out. You're correct about that.
The administration indicated that this was a reaction to a video and was a spontaneous reaction.
They did.
It took them a long time to say this was a terrorist act by a terrorist group.
First time in American history that a presidential debate was a tag team debate, 2-on-1. That was Candy Crowley correcting Mitt Romney, saying he was wrong, saying that President Obama, in fact, did right away call the attack on Benghazi terrorism. In fact, he did not, as Candy Crowley later admitted. Joining us now again from Washington is Cheryl Atkinson, author of the new book, Stonewalled. Ms. Atkinson, tell me about where you were when you saw this unusual exchange where a member of the media party thought she'd lecture a member of the Republican Party to the aid of the Democratic Party. What was the reaction in your shop when you saw that exchange?
I just thought that Romney seemed so befuddled when Candy Crowley took the president's side, as if Romney clearly thought the president was incorrect, and that the president seemed unusually anxious to move on, move along, move along. So I didn't know who was telling the truth, but I went back after that and looked at the recording and looked at the transcript, and it seemed to me that Romney was correct, although there was some wiggle room because the president did mention acts of terror once he segued in that speech to discussing that this was the anniversary of 9/11, but he used every synonym except terrorism to refer directly to the Benghazi attack. But I discuss this in the book because there's a more important point, I think. Unbeknownst to me at the time, and I think to a lot of people at CBS, we had a clip, an interview with the President of the United States that had been conducted by a 60 Minutes correspondent the day after the 9/11 attacks, in which the President acknowledged that what Romney said in the debate was correct. But we didn't air that. Not only did we not air it, we didn't even acknowledge the existence of the tape, even when this became a debate issue. And the transcript that was later revealed to me and some other reporters and producers was that Steve Kroft said to the president, you avoided calling this an act of terror or using the word terrorism. And the president said, right. In other words, agreeing with what Romney later said in the debate. And Steve Kroft went on to say in the interview, why is that or what was the reason? And the president explained it was too early to tell. Well, we now have internal documents that show it wasn't too early. They had already concluded it was an act of terror. They had told that to the Libyans. They had said Ansar al-Sharia was responsible. But that aside, I have to ask why CBS sat on the clip that would have resolved the matter at least in a lot of people's eyes, in Romney's favor. We only found out about that, some of us, the Friday before the election, weeks after the debate, and made the effort as a group, those of us who found out about it, to make sure that that clip was published, even belatedly, but at least before the election.
You know, there's a few different aspects in our discussion. One is the consensus viewpoint of some journalists. The other is media bosses trying to cool you and other investigators on stories that are critical of the Obama administration. But there was a darker element that you talk about in your book, Stonewalled. You actually caught it on your cell phone video. Let's show a clip from that, and then I'm going to ask you. Sorry, it's not a clip. It's in the background. We'll show it right now. This is you filming your computer as it automatically deletes words. Your hands are not on the screen. You're filming your own laptop deleting things, someone else controlling it. Can you explain what this was about and what this meant?
Well, for context, this was about 9 months after I had my first forensics exam conducted on the offer of an acquaintance who thought I might be monitored because of my reporting, was familiar with the government practices. And the forensics showed that my CBS laptop computer, as well as my Apple desktop computer, had been the target of a long-term remote surveillance operation by somebody. I was told the software was proprietary to a government agency. It was a keystroke monitoring program. They had my passwords. We're using my Skype to listen to audio. We're looking at my Benghazi files, accessing the CBS system, and so on and so on. I also learned through a total of 3 forensics exams during this time period that the infiltrators had the capability to operate my computer as if remotely, as if they were sitting in front of it. With that knowledge then, now 9 months later, I'm sitting at home on a different computer hooked up to my Wi-Fi system, and the words start wiping at hyper speed. Not the slow backspace that you see later in the video, but the first couple of seconds, it was a hyperspeed wiping of the file that I was in that my expert said he'd never seen. 2 experts I showed him to, never seen anything like it before. In fact, they said they wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't captured a little bit of it on video. I could pause it if I put my thumb on the mouse pad, but otherwise it was wiping. Once I was able to close out a file, the drop-down menu was disabled. Then another open file began that slow backspace, and it only quit until when I got off of the Wi-Fi system. And my experts have only one theory as to what was happening, that somebody was doing that to show me and intimidate me and show me that they could do that. I was specifically working on a Benghazi story, and that very week, in fact, the White House had launched, as it often did, an aggressive campaign of complaining and pushback about my stories with CBS. So that was, of course, the first thing that came to my mind.
Isn't that incredible? We're speaking with Sharyl Attkisson, former CBS journalist, author of Stonewalled. Thank you so much for joining us. Some troubling things we've learned.